Selamat malam, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Alhamdulillah, puji syukur, malam ini kita bisa bertemu pada satu bagian dari kegiatan perkuliahan hukum lingkungan, yaitu mendatangkan dosen tamu. Dan saat ini kita sudah kedatangan Dr. Jocelyn De Piero. So good evening everyone who came into this Zoom meeting room, and also for those who watching us in the YouTube channel of Kanal Pengetahuan Fakultas Hukum UGM, Viva Justicia. So just before us, we already have the very distinguished speakers from United States Environmental Protection Agency. Her name is Dr. Jocelyn De Piero, and her basic study is toxicology. Even though for the master, she also have the pursuing for the environmental toxicology as well as the policy, science and public affairs. That's her master. So she research and Peace Corps activities in India, and I mean she already going to the ground for the developing countries, and I think it is very a golden chance for us today to have her speaking for us for this public lecture about the USA and International Resource Conservation and Management Laws. And this program is brought by International Association of Law Schools, and Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada is a part of it. So we are very happy and also very grateful that we have this opportunity with Dr. Jocelyn De Piero. So I think you have 30 to 45 minutes to present and give us knowledge on the USA and International Resource Conservation Law. So time is yours, Dr. Piero, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. So yes, I'm Dr. Jocelyn De Piero. You could call me Jocelyn. I'm a toxicologist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. A little background about me is that I worked in waste and materials management in West Africa and various locations in the United States. So I've been to India, but I haven't been to Indonesia, although I really want to be. And while in India, I enjoyed a couple weeks there and got to see some of the waste management practices there. As you'll see, all of that is pretty relevant for our topic today on USA and international resource conservation and management laws. First, a disclaimer. None of the views expressed here are meant to represent the United States Environmental Protection Agency. They're considered my own. So, what is resource and material management? In law, this is commonly referring to waste or material management. Laws and policies related to materials management are found at nearly every level of government, from the local to state and provincial and federal, national, and international levels. Categories of materials and waste include, but are not limited to, residential, commercial, industrial, hazardous, e-waste, and recyclables. So in the United States, oftentimes before environmental law can change, a big event happens. So for us, the Cuyahoga River fire, where there were so many chemicals in the water that it caught on fire and caused a huge fire to spread. In the at the end of the 1960s, it resulted in a change in American Clean Water Act and how things could be disposed in the water. But then it went on to the Love Canal explosion, which is the picture to the right is the Love Canal with a bunch of barrels in it of waste that had just been dumped there. And so it was dumped and then it exploded, giving off this green explosion. And like, here's a picture on the bottom of a little kid saying there was a mix of 82 chemicals. They were in the canal for 25 years. And then what happened was sickness and death.
Sorry,
Children were sick.
I think your screen is cut in half in here.
Oh.
Yes. Perhaps can you fix it?
What is it looking like?
Could you maximize it perhaps first?
Yeah, it was maximized.
Okay.
That's why I'm not sure. No, hold on. Let me see if there's something else I could. Let me try sharing it a different way. Okay, I'm just going to share my whole screen.
Okay.
Okay. Tell me if this is going to be better. Is that better?
No, still the same, but it's okay. Okay, then it's okay. Then don't worry about it.
Oh, that's too bad.
No,
okay.
You can share your PowerPoint. Is it good or?
Yeah, share it with you guys later. Do you want me to email it?
Yes, sir. It's okay. I'll
right
share
now?
the screen for you.
Okay. So most household and common waste are regulated by state, provinces, and localities. Much solid and hazardous waste is also regulated through the federal, in the United States, through the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, also known as RCRA. In 1976, Congress passed the RCRA as an amendment to the 1965 Solid Waste Disposal Act. The legislation was a reaction to two growing problems: the large amount of household and industrial waste being produced, and the large number of sites contaminated by unregulated disposal of hazardous waste. So RCRA, it tried to address the first problem by encouraging resource recycling, waste reduction, and minimum standards for landfill use design. And the second, by promoting proper waste disposal and cleanup for hazardous waste management sites. In addition, if waste or hazardous substances contaminate land or water, responsible parties may be liable for cleanup costs under what is called the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, also known as CERCLA. Because waste regulation statutes only deal with waste once it is produced, Congress passed the Pollution Prevention Act to encourage the reduction, reuse, and recycling of waste. So those are the key waste management legislative activity that happened in the United States.
I already have the PowerPoint. If you want to let me share the screen. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm on slide 6.
Okay, is it good enough for you?
Yep.
Okay.
That's good.
So this is your last slide, right? Okay.
Go to the next one now.
Let's continue. Thank you.
Go ahead to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay. So In the United States, solid waste may be hazardous waste if they fall into one of two categories: listed waste and characteristic waste. Listed waste are specific waste and waste streams described by name in various lists compiled by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, where I work. They turn everything they touch into hazardous waste. These wastes are just detrimental to everything. Characteristic waste are wastes that exhibit a hazardous characteristic: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity. Generators are tasked with determining whether the waste they produce exhibits any of the characteristics of hazardous waste, either through EPA-approved tests or through their knowledge of the waste properties. So Congress created a system to track hazardous waste from its creation to its disposal in order to assure that all hazardous waste is accounted for and disposed of responsibly. The system includes different responsibilities for each type of actor handling hazardous waste. So the generator of the hazardous waste must first get a permit to create the waste, then must follow strict labeling and record-keeping guidelines. When it's time to dispose of the hazardous waste, generators fill out a manifest form that travels with the waste and tracks it wherever it goes. Transporters of hazardous waste must also track the waste using the manifest system. The hazardous waste ends up at a treatment, storage, and disposal facility called TSD, where it is disposed of according to strict federal regulations. TSD must also report the waste disposal to the generator through the manifest system. Due to the inherently risky nature of their activities, TSDs are subject to federal siting, permitting, operating closure, and financial assurance requirements. If the system operates correctly, a waste is tracked responsibly, managed from cradle to grave. And hopefully through these laws, we don't get more love canals with barrels just thrown in random places and spreading hazardous materials. Okay, next slide. Go ahead. Yeah. So you can go back. Okay. So there are several international agreements regulating the transportation and disposal of hazardous waste. And we'll be talking about those. To get started, there's this quote from Basal et al. International environmental law is waste law in a world where waste has become a global commodity. So that quote is gonna kind of it heads towards what we're going to be talking about with international environmental waste management laws. Okay, next slide. So there were different events that resulted in environmental laws that made a big change. International environmental law, as it set a formal and informal regulatory mechanisms designed to organize and facilitate the production, the redistribution, and reintegration of waste into global circuits. International environmental law is waste law in a world where waste has become a global commodity. Underlying these transformative circulatory processes, the law acts as a waste recycler. The materiality of waste remains fundamentally the same. Its legal nature and judicial qualification changes across they change across sovereign jurisdictions. So the legal metamorphosis of hazardous waste into recyclable commodity facilitates its global circulation and redistribution. For example, European plastic waste becomes a recyclable commodity in Egypt's primary sector, and ultimately a manufacturing resource in China's secondary sector. Throughout the production, management, and distribution processes, the law acts as a lustration tool. The law purifies and expiates waste's corrupted nature by transforming it into a valuable commodity. As a set of legal practices, documents, and institutions, international environmental law is purposefully or unintentionally designed to displace, manage, and/or organize the production of waste. In other words, international environmental law transformed the negative value of waste to be externalized into a positive value, recycled into the global political economy. International environmental law is thus waste law. So we're going to get started with a case here of a case study where a ship took waste all around the world, and I'll just give you this story. It's an interesting story. On August 31st, 1986, the cargo ship PNC, registered in Liberia, was loaded with more than 14,000 tons of ash from waste incinerators in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The city had previously sent such waste to New Jersey, but that state refused to accept any more after 1984. The company handling the waste, Joseph Polino and Sons, subcontracted shipment to Amalgamated Shipping Corp. And Coastal Carrier Inc., operators of PNC. The latter intended to dump the ash in the Bahamas. So it was like burned waste. They were going to dump it in the Bahamas. That was the plan because they couldn't get it to go anywhere else. However, the Bahamian government turned the ship away, and Philadelphia withheld payment to the companies because the waste was not disposed of. Over the next 16 months, PNC searched for 16 months. This is a long time. Searched all over the Atlantic for a place to dump its cargo. Dominican Republic, Honduras, Panama, Bermuda, Guinea-Bissau, and the Dutch Antilles refused. Its return to Philadelphia also failed. In January 1988, the crew finally dumped 4,000 tons of the waste onto Gonaives in Haiti as topsoil fertilizer. That's what they told them it was. When Greenpeace informed the Haitian government of the origin of the waste, the Haitian Commerce Minister ordered the crew to reload the ash for the ship, but the ship slipped away. The Haitian government subsequently banned all waste imports. Local cleanup crews later buried some of the waste in a bunker inland, but the rest remained on the beach. So they went on to unload the rest of the cargo in Senegal, Morocco, Yugoslavia, Sri Lanka, and Singapore. And after repairs in Yugoslavia, the ship's name was changed. And then again, it was changed when people still were recognizing its identity. So, in the rest of the ash in the ship, it disappeared en route from Singapore to Sri Lanka in November 1988. So the crew people refused to comment and didn't want to talk about what they did with the rest of the ash. But eventually the ash that was dumped in Haiti was commanded to be taken back. And so the New York City Trade Waste Commission investigated the Eastern Environmental Services, whose owner was part of the Joseph Paolini and Sons. They agreed to give the company a license to operate in New York City in condition that it would contribute to the cleanup in Haiti. So they went back to get the waste, and then when they brought it back towards the United States, they finally said, the U.S. government actually said, this isn't hazardous waste. So they had literally taken this waste all over the world, trying to get rid of it because it was thought to be hazardous ash. and it really wasn't in the end. And so this type of incident this took about 2 years of traveling. It resulted in the need for some changes in environmental laws. The case contributed to the creation of the Basal Convention about disposal of hazardous waste materials. It's important to note that while Philadelphia did find places to put its trash, the cost of disposal between 2000 and 2014 doubled to $140 per ton and was projected to reach a total of $367 million a year by 2016. So waste is definitely becoming a commodity globally. Next slide. So this is another study that resulted in changes in environmental laws. In the 1980s, Italy paid a Nigerian town $100 a month to store toxic waste. Italy could only process 20% of their toxic waste that it generated. The rest is quietly sent abroad, or before it's sent to abroad. So it was like, why not? When you can pay a poor African community to store your dangerous chemicals for less. The small fishing village of Koko, Nigeria made international headlines in 1988 when it was discovered that 2 Italian firms had arranged for the storage of 18,000 drums of hazardous waste with Koko residents. The containers were disguised as building materials and offloaded into a local man's vacant yard for $100 per month. By the time the Nigerian authorities identified the scheme, the drums were leaking and people were getting sick. Nigerian students in Italy learned that the waste dump in Koko about it and alerted the media. In May 1988, the Daily Times, a government-run Nigerian newspaper, traveled to the tiny port to investigate. There, in a vacant residential lot, reporters found over 2,000 drums, sacks, and containers, some of which were identified with the letter R, the international symbol indicating toxic and harmful industrial waste. Many had already burst and were emitting an offensive odor in the area. The lot's owner, Sunday Nana, confirmed that he had agreed to let foreign importers use his land. He had initially asked for $200 per month, but negotiations settled at $100. 4 shipments had arrived since the previous year, and more were coming. The Nigerian government was shocked. Immediately, it ordered an Italian ship docked in Lagos to be seized and detained. And they insisted that all the chemicals be put on these ships. 28% of the waste contained polychlorinated biphenyls, a combustible that could produce a highly toxic compound called dioxin. So Italy agreed to move the waste. And then when they tried to take it in at different European ports, it was refused. So for years, an Italian importer living in Nigeria had managed to divert ships with their legal destinations to smaller port cities like Koko, where cargo inspections were forgiving or virtually non-existent. It was Raffaele who paid off Sunday Nana. When the story broke, he fled the country on June 2nd without a passport and apparently bypassed immigration at the airport in Lagos. So Nigeria ended up really embarrassed because they had just been talking about how we shouldn't take the waste and be waste ambassadors for other people's countries. And then they found out that there had been some Italians sneaking waste into the area. So in the end, neighbors exposed to the toxic waste, which contained the PCBs, dimethyl formaldehyde, and asbestos fibers, suffered nausea, paralysis, premature birth. Sunday Nana himself died of throat cancer. Even Nigerian Port Authority workers who helped transport the poison back into the Italian ship walked away with chemical burns despite having worn protective suits. So lawsuits went on for more than 21 years regarding the waste that was disposed there in Cocoa. And Italy tried to get rid of the chemicals, but was refused permission for a long time. So, yeah, and in the end, facing increased pressure from international press and advocacy groups, the Italian government cabinet approved a decree that banned export of toxic chemicals to developing nations and limited future reliance on European Union countries for processing. Okay, go ahead and the next slide. So this is the slide about the Basel Convention. It's what resulted from both of these two examples. When we noticed that their core objective of these international environmental treaties isn't often the protection of the environment, but the efficient management and commodification of industrial externalities. So one example is the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal, effective since 1992. Historically, this regulatory framework emerged in response to the globalization of waste exchange, which had rested since the 1970s on lower shipping costs combined with an increase in waste disposal costs in the North. The situation resulted in what is now referred to as toxic colonialism, in which corporations of the global North avoided stringent domestic environmental regulation by shipping their toxic waste to dumping grounds in the global South. Toxic contamination scandals such as PNC and cocoa accidents involving in the first case an American company in Haiti and in the second case an Italian company in Nigeria provided the context in which the need for international regulation of hazardous waste trade emerged. So a total of at least, I think it might be more than 185 now. Yeah, I think parties are involved in the Basel Convention. Its key objective is the reduction of hazardous waste production and circulation. However, since the entry into force of the convention, the global circulation of hazardous waste has consistently grown. Rather than reducing waste production and circulation, the Basel Convention specifically provides for the efficient management and flow of hazardous waste across sovereign jurisdictions. The Convention's general obligations confirm the legality of trans-border hazardous waste transfer by facilitating the movement of waste at the expense of its elimination. Facing the material impossibility of waste elimination, the drafters of the convention agreed to organize and rationalize its global circulation. Under the Basel regime, waste harvesting has thus become a legally sanctioned economic activity. So the point of the Basel Convention, in short, was to have countries clearly mark and identify what waste they have, and when they give it, have permission to give it to another country, and that the country receiving would know what they are clearly receiving. So it was to increase the amount of transparency across borders in disposal and transportation of these hazardous waste materials. But as I was saying, the literature is talking about how oftentimes it's become a way of doing efficient management of waste by just allowing them to more clearly say, okay, well, I want to get rid of that or that. The problem that we'll find is that the definition of the different chemicals is not consistent across countries. And so bad hazardous chemicals are still being given to poor nations. Next slide. So let's see here. So this is going more into what I've been talking about the commodification of waste by law. The Basal regime doesn't precisely define hazardous waste, leaving the legal qualification of waste within the sovereign discretionary interpretation of state authorities. In 2015, the Basel Convention of the Parties failed to adopt universal technical guidelines on the definition of electronic discards, partly because of disagreements over their material complexity. Therefore, e-waste may or may not be considered waste in general or hazardous waste specifically. So, and I'll get into that more as well. Go ahead, next slide. So now recycling is what has made, I don't want to call it waste, we call it materials management when it's recycling. But this is the direction of recycling at the time being. So the global trade in recyclable discards is best illustrated by the fastest growing commodity in waste management and recycling, e-waste. The electronic waste has been particularly valuable for manufacturing countries such as China. E-waste is mined for the lead, copper, metals found in circuit boards, wiring, chips, and electronic parts produced by the computer-based industrial economy. As such, circuit boards are highly toxic, but their recycling is detrimental to the environment and the health of the workers as well, since they are treated with acid baths, which are then dumped into streams and city canals. E-waste should objectively be covered under the umbrella of hazardous waste, provided by the Basel Convention. However, because of the procedural and substantive limitations of the Basel Convention, e-waste flows between jurisdictions according to an international division of labor and an unequal distribution of environmental harm. So let's turn to the legal geography of e-waste management to consider this ecologically unequal exchange of industrial discards between the consumer core and the manufacturing periphery. Since the turn of the millennia, a new generation of preferential free trade agreements has emerged in the Pacific to answer the rising global demand for electronic hardware. Japan concluded a series of bilateral investment treaties with Southeast Asian countries. I'm not sure if that includes Indonesia. You guys will have to tell me about that. And most recently with China. What prompted such geopolitical enemies in the South China Sea to become intimate trade partners is the e-waste and plastic recycling boom. The objective of their bilateral agreement, effective since 2008, is to transfer Japanese e-waste to the Chinese industrial coastline to maximize its recycling value. Japan and China are both part of the Basel Convention, and it allows for the free flow of waste so long as both parties agree to it. Okay, we can go. Oh, no, not next slide. No, hold on, my bad. Next case study. So the next case study is European waste and what is going on there. So electronic waste is currently governed by the European Community Directive In Europe, the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, it's a broad directive framework for the reuse, recycling, and recovery of e-waste. So what they're finding is that a lot of people who want to deal with e-waste will relabel it so that it doesn't have the hazardous waste terms on it. That way they can easily ship it to other countries and such. So again, we're seeing waste or materials renamed to get them to be where you want them to be, to sell them for the purposes that you want to have them sold for. And so while it's making all of these materials high commodities, it's also not healthy for environmental reasons, because oftentimes less developed nations are trying to process these electronic goods with chemicals with hazardous chemicals in an unsafe manner. And so there is a need for more detailed laws about what is hazardous waste, and a commitment by countries across the board that are part of the convention to sticking to these laws. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I gave this talk with India, and so when I did that, I looked up some Indian material management laws and like who was involved. So they have the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, who is charged with helping with materials and waste management. State Pollution Control Board, set up in various states, also look at who is releasing the waste. The National Environmental Policy of 2006, it emphasized disposal of waste and recycling and treating waste. So, and in this picture, we have e-waste in India. There's a lot of it, and this is just one little spot where some people were working with it. They have no protective equipment on. They're likely being harshly exposed to hazardous chemicals. So for Indonesia, what do you guys see? Do you see people working with electronics this way? What are the laws that you have in place to regulate waste management and e-waste?
Yeah, I think e-waste is also became our concern, Jocelyn, because one of our students also give a nice brief explanation during the class about the e-waste, because in Indonesia, e-waste is like a hidden part, but it lies in the reality, because we still have so many import on the electronic waste from, for example, Singapore, Japan. In the origin country, in Japan and Singapore, it's already been regarded as a waste, but then it is imported by Indonesian, and then we remanufacture, reproduce, refurbish, and then voila, we have a brand new things, and then it's available in the market. And I mean, there's still a lot of people who think that, okay, I'll buy this thing because it is cheap, and then I don't need to worry about how if it is broken, because it's very cheap compared to another second, for example, second hand tools, second hand electronics, second hand things is still something that it's common thing in here. That's the problem also, indeed.
Yeah, I think it's good for us to know. It's not necessarily bad to reuse and reduce. That's like great, because it means less elements are being reintroduced for a new product, right? But the issue is that industry is there oversight? Is there someone looking to see, oh, is he pouring an acid bath on that cell phone to get the copper off of it or something? And if he's pouring that acid bath, is he doing it with gloves on, or is he doing it with nothing? So that's like the environmental health perspective is, okay, like recycling, we want recycling, yes, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't cause harm to those who need the money the most, because it's this vicious cycle. It's like the rich people throw their stuff down, and then the people who have need for money, they expose themselves to hazards in order to get the value out of that good, and then they resell it, and the person who's wealthy buys it for cheaper, saves themselves money. And so it's just like this cycle, and the person that is hurt in it is the low income person. And so I don't know if you guys know if there's any regulation do you know if there's any regulation regarding e-waste?
For specific e-waste, no, there is no, but we only regard this as hazardous waste, and we have the regulation for it. But then, yes, okay. Indeed, you underline the very basic things, that the awareness, the information asymmetry of the people. I mean, for the small scale industry, for example, that became a problem, because small scale industries, I think, just like in this picture you share, they didn't care about how to treat well when they operating with this. And even, I mean, for example, if someone have a thermometer, a very manual thermometer with the mercury, and then it is broken. I mean, based on the health perspective, of course, we must do a precautionary on cleaning the mercury.
Yeah.
But then we use common people here. Of course, we only just get a tissue or get a clothes, and then just wipe it down, and then clean the glass if then there is a glass broken, and that's all. And also that also happened for the lamp, for the battery, for example. The awareness as well as the eagerness to treat it well, it's still very low. And I think the government itself has no capacity to going for these small things. I mean, there's still a lot of bigger things that happen, and then it's beyond their beyond their attention. I think that's.
Yeah, I think that's the issue in a lot of the countries. When we were talking with India too, India was talking about that, like, you know, how do we enforce recycling? Like, how are we supposed to do that? And so I was like, well, when I was in Australia, I have like random international experiences, so it helps me learn new things. In Australia, the waste management company, if you put recycling in the trash can, they would fine you. And so, like, the waste management company was managing those laws for the government there. So in a case like that, I get like where the population is so big and yet the enforcers are so few, I think you have to find a different way to enforce them. And get some kind of incentive there. India also, they said for them that there's incentive to recycle your mobile devices properly, because like Samsung or something, like apparently by law, they're supposed to take back what they have given. And so that we don't have that in the United States. But I thought that was interesting. We have that for lead batteries, for car batteries. They will like they require that whenever you get a new one, they want the old one back. And if you don't give it to them, they charge you. And so if you give it to them, they'll give you the money back. So there are different ways to get people to make positive choices, but you have to look at the culture of that particular community, and also see like, okay, wait, is what works for this culture? What works with the resources we have for our government members and stuff? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the concept you mentioned is more focusing on the product liability, right? But we cannot implement that. We have the regulation, of course, on the consumer protection, but until today, there's no like. I mean, if then the company give you that incentive that you or the incentive, I mean, you must return your battery once you want to buy a new one. That will be yeah, very significant to the environment, but of course we don't have that. Yeah, as I mentioned, it is regulated. I mean the producer liability, but it's not that strict and then detailed into the concept of that every producer must take a responsible to the product, and even after the product itself. No, we don't have that. We don't have that policy for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, there are a couple more slides. You can go ahead.
Okay.
They're not major. So this was just to get people thinking about, okay, so how much difference there is between countries. The top right picture, that's India.
Yeah.
The top left picture is Benin. That's where I lived in West Africa. And the bottom left picture is Japan, where they recycle everything down to the tiny piece. I don't know how Indonesia is. I'm guessing Indonesia is close to India. Is it? How does it look?
No, not close, but not close to either to Japan. I mean, the problem, for example, in where I live, in my city in Yogyakarta, where our university lies, is we already have the separation, the separation of waste. Yeah, we already put it in the trash, plastic in the plastic trash bin, and then paper in the paper plastic bin, and then others organic and unorganic. But the problem then, when it is disposed in the final disposal, waste disposal center, is then mixed again. The government did not provide that mechanism, and even in, I mean, in India, of course, that is nasty. I mean, that is very bad. But I mean, we don't like that. But what I want to share with you is that in Jogja here, we have several community that they make their own waste bank, garbage bank. Even though, as I mentioned before, then the final destination of the waste itself is still a problematic things to do, to think about. And also a community of what you call, I don't know the name in English, but it's more like a beggar, you know. It's not a beggar, but what is, it's a collector, a waste collector.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the temporary site of waste disposal, they have their own group, and then they have their shift, walking shift, before this trash is going to the final dumping site. Okay, so it is a way more on the not the traditional, but what is you can call orthodox economic way, because then they separate bottles, plastics, and the papers, and then they sold it back. They sell it back for their own good. But it is very helpful for the waste collection, waste separation. But this is I mean even though our regulation, we have law that mandate that final dumping site is not it should be made on the sanitary filing, sanitary waste management. But then there is no province, no region in Indonesia that already implemented, because so many reasons. I mean, the technology is expensive and blah blah blah. But most of us still doing the open dumping site.
Okay.
This is became problematic when then the waste water, of course, is hazardous, and then also the mountain of the waste itself, because it's only like they throwing the waste and we just bulldozing it and without anything else, and to operating the incinerator is also highly cost, of course. And even I think for the you mentioning in your first slide, you mentioning about the how specific waste is quite different with the hazardous waste, right? In US, there's a differentiation between hazardous waste, while in here we only name it as a hazardous waste, and it is quite problematic. Even though in the practical, of course, we differentiate between the medical waste and the hazardous waste. But then there's a problem when, for example, the crude oil in US, I think it is categorized into specific waste in which you do a specific treatment for it. But in here, we generate it as hazardous waste. So it's quite problematic when we talk about the bioremediation, for example.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting. Do other people are anyone listening? Do you have any thoughts?
Anyone want to give a comment, please? Raise your hand. Yes, we have 112 participants right now.
Yeah, it was at 115 a little bit ago.
Yes.
People, that's great.
Want to ask question?
I think there's one more slide, like a conclusion slide.
Okay, so while we're waiting the
class. So one of the key takeaways when it comes to waste and material management with law is that there are various levels of government involved regarding different types of waste. So like we said, municipal, residential, hazardous waste. Hazardous waste can go up to federal level if industry releases it into water or some other level. And these laws regulate these different waste and how they're disposed of. And that can be something simple like a ticket, like I was talking about Australia giving a ticket at the waste site if you put the recycling in the waste area, or a civil lawsuit would result if you're an industry or an individual who is illegally dumping materials, whether it be putting hazardous materials with the regular waste, or if they're putting it, if they're putting it with the regular waste, or if they're putting it in water, or if they're dumping it in the forest, all of those things make you liable to civil lawsuits and criminal lawsuits. So if you're thinking about, oh, I want to do environmental law, then this might be an area for you if you want to prosecute those people who dump materials illegally and who are destroying environmental regions. I mean, you could also defend them if you feel like you're called to defend that population. You can also do work if you're in environmental science, like I am. You could end up working to revitalize these hazardous waste sites. So like my agency, when someone has polluted the site, they charge them and do a civil suit where the company has to pay for the remediation of the hazardous site. And someone from my agency will go and help to organize and plan how to remediate that site so that it's safe again. And so that's a position that you could take if you're someone who's in environmental science, since I know there's a lot of different types of people in this audience. That's great if you like, do you guys have any questions also about like what type of position could you realistically have related to waste and material management, or something to be on the lookout for? Those type of questions are also welcome.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Jocelyn, for sharing your opinion on this one. I mean, these are various aspects of environmental conservation, and especially on the waste also. So class, anyone here participant? So please, if you have question, please ask to Miss Jocelyn here.
Maybe I am, sir.
Okay,
Hello.
please.
Sorry, because my English is not fluently.
Okay.
And I try to explain my question. I think, as you said before in the first slide, basically international environment law start from the awareness of country to process waste and management waste. I think the philosophies of the management is make a better forward. I think that's a philosophy. And then you explain about this law and this problem become a commodity, become a trade commodity in between countries. How can you explain the correlation between sustainability of the earth with the low environment and business as usual? Because business have market, have apa ya Pak, keniscayaan pasar.
Okay. A market needs to be, or it is a certainty.
Yeah, certainty.
It's a must by the market.
Okay.
Jadi, that's a point of my question. Thank you.
Okay. So I definitely think that like how do basically that's a good question. Like how does business and the environmental issue here, how do they play out together with waste as a commodity? I think if we have laws somehow, if e-waste processors have laws that teach them to have environmentally sustainable and environmental health protecting materials, like wearing the gloves, wearing the face mask so they don't get splashed by things. That allows for them, yes, they can do e-waste, they can recycle it, which is, it's needed. There's a place for it, you know, because the more, we don't want to have to just keep getting new all the time. It's better to recycle when able. But to come up with processes that are better for our health and also don't harm the environment, that's important. The reason they're not there yet is because e-waste is relatively new. But then when we think about things like leather, I don't know if you know about leather, the material like from cowhide, but that used to be cause a lot of pollution because they used to release the chemical when they bathe it and stuff. They would release the chemical into the river, and so it would cause problems. But now, after the EPA and society started saying, wait, we got to do this in a good, like a healthier way, we found techniques that don't have to pollute the water anymore. And we found techniques to manage that waste so that it goes somewhere where it can be contained. So in the same way with e-waste, I think it's just because it's new, we don't have the techniques yet. But I think if we take the time, if our governments take the time to say, you know what, let's develop the techniques for managing these items well, you know, I think it will take off. It'll be good for business. It'll be good for the environment. It'll be good for individual well-being financially and health-wise. So I think there's nothing to be opposed because it's good. If we could recycle, that's great, but let's do it in a way that is good for the environmental health too. But we just have to figure out those ways, especially in countries that don't have as much money to do some of the more costly recycling methods.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so we have a question from Tiffany in the chat. So,
Yeah.
with regard to e-waste, what do you think is the key to create a successful environmental protection in developing countries? I mean, aside that you mentioned before that also the government and also the best practice must be shown. What do you think the key and important factor to be strengthened or to be prioritized?
So I think what I was just getting at, it's in the US, what has made the difference and brought progress, making us more environmentally healthy, has been when the Environmental Protection Agency and private industry too have made the effort to find new techniques. So the EPA, yes, we enforce the laws, but we also help to find new methods for managing environmental issues. And I think if a government takes the time to invest in this part of their agency, like their research, to invest in that for methods that could do e-waste better and more efficiently, better for the human health, less resources as well as less money. I think that's a great way to start because it'll pay off. Because if these companies are individuals who do e-waste, if they find out like, okay, I can do this, they're going to be paying taxes on their business and the work that they do. And that comes back to the government. And I think the governments need to realize that this is going to end up being profitable for them. If these businesses work correctly, then it's profitable. But I mean, there is also the need for enforcement, but I don't know, it depends upon the country, the ratio of enforcers to company and to industry that there are. So, yeah. But you can't, like, you could try to enforce, like, hey, you're hurting yourself. You could say that. But the problem is, if they don't have an alternative method, they're just going to end up paying a fee and go back to doing it the wrong way, you know? So it's like, I think a good investment start at this point for all societies, not just the less developed, but also the US, is to find methods of recycling, e-waste recycling, that are like basic but sustainable and environmentally sound. I think if they do that, take the time to do that, that'll be beneficial for the whole society in the long run.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. So I think, yes, indeed, what you mentioned, what your point of view is very important. When waste, it should be treated from, especially hazardous waste, it should be treated from cradle to the grave, right? But
yeah,
what you mentioned about alternative, there's an alternative. I think it's very, very interesting case. I want to share you that we have many illegal miners, gold miners, and then they use mercury, right, to do the amalgamation process. And then the problem is then we cannot control, the government cannot control these illegal miners or small scale miners. But then there is some research, a research made by also the government, the research body of the government, to substitute the mercury by using cyanide. I mean, this is not, this is a very, very funny thing, that you substitute hazardous with more hazardous ones, with more lethal substance. But it is happened in here, and it is this research is made by the government. So before it is then happen, this idea want to happen, and then the environmental impact assessment stopped this plan, because the question is simple: how do you treat that waste materials that's contaminated with the cyanide?
Yeah.
but the funny thing is, this idea was brought out by the research body of the government itself. So I mean, having an alternative is good, but rational and proper one should be also underlined, right? Okay, so so Jocelyn, I want to share another question. I think it's very, very nice question, good question from Bryce, that how the treatment of COVID-19 hazardous waste, medical waste especially in US, because in Indonesia we have this problem. Of course, I mean, I think we only have the calculation of the numbers, but then how to treat it, how to participate, how to minimize, and how to filter this waste is a problem for us. Okay, so please, Jocelyn.
So I'm not as aware. I've worked with some medicine before in that area, but I haven't worked any with COVID. So I'm not sure how they're doing it. I think it's probably the same as what they have do it in the US. They bag it, dispose of it. It has separate waste containers. It has a separate waste facility. So it's just kept separate from all waste, the medical waste is. So when we have it in a red bag. So our medical waste is kept different. So that's pretty much all I can say about that.
Okay, and do you have in mind about which countries should be regarded as the better or best practice for the waste management?
Japan is the best. Yeah, they break down everything, like they separate it out, and they reuse so much more of their waste than everyone else. They've gotten a system, they recycle more efficiently than anyone else. I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone else who does it better than Japan. So, yeah, I mean, Europe has a lot of positive things too, but again, it's not necessarily consistent by country. And then I haven't been to other ones, but Japan consistently in my work with waste management has been above and beyond everyone else.
Okay, so next is Kevin. Kevin, please share your question.
I would like to ask, there's currently an argument to privatize waste management in certain countries, seeing how it makes the waste management more efficient in the countries that do privatize waste management, such as Japan and Malaysia. Do you think the US will take similar steps, or which will privatization help Indonesia in their own waste management? That's it. Yeah, thank you.
So in the United States, it's mostly privatized. There might be some municipalities or cities who do the waste management, but primarily it is privatized in the United States. And I mean, it works fine. We're not the most efficient waste managers, though. Their recycling is not that great in most of the country. Certain parts of the country, like California and New York, recycling is much better. But like where I'm at now, there are some places where they don't even recycle; they just take the waste only. So I don't know. Like, it's okay that it's happening that way, and like, if it was by the municipality, it'd probably be a lot less. It'd probably not work as well, and they wouldn't do as good a job probably. So it's probably good it's privatized for us in the United States. I think it varies by country though, like what's most effective because of the culture of the country. In the United States, people like private businesses a lot, and in certain parts of the country, if it were the county government or the city government, people might rebel and be like, oh no, I don't want to have to give my waste to them, blah, blah. So it's probably for the best that it's private in the United States, mostly.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. I think I want to connect with the Raitama question about how is the enforcement in US, and can you describe the scale of this effectiveness of the enforcement itself?
So enforcement, like the enforcement of of doing what? The enforcement of what activity?
For the waste, especially about the waste management and how the company, if then they breach the obligation, they didn't follow the program.
Yeah, So in the US, for the most part, it's like people just go along with the rule. If not, then you can get fined. But the big thing that happens most of the time is they just won't take your waste. Like if you do something with your waste that's not right, like if you put the big bag of recycling inside the bag, the container for the trash, they might not take your whole can. They won't take the whole bin. And so if they don't do that, then you're like, man, I wanted them to take it. So next time you do it the right way. So a lot of times that's the case. I think that for the US, the thing that is negative is the people who don't hire a private company. So people who don't get a company to pick up their waste, they just go dump it sometimes on the side of the road. They'll go out into the countryside and they'll dump their waste. So sometimes they do that. Some people take their waste to the landfill themselves. So they'll just take it over and there's a cost for dumping it in the landfill directly. And so you don't pay a private person to do it. But I would say the biggest issue is when you can recycling, people don't recycle, and the enforcement in the US is not good for that. It's not like it was in Australia. Like here, if you don't recycle, then they let you not recycle. So yeah, but in Australia, they were like, we saw recycling in your bin. That's not acceptable. So, and then, yeah, and then dumping on the street. That is a problem, especially in the countryside.
Okay. So, Jocelyn, based on your professional expertise, do you think the garbage sorting is the best way to make a better waste management?
Garbage.
Another alternative mechanism you can propose or you can share to us that it's not only about garbage sorting, waste separation, garbage sorting, but also another. What do you think based on your professional expertise?
So for waste management, I think the best strategy would be to have, there's different types of recycling, and there's a recycling that's called single stream. So like if you just put any of your recyclings in a bin, you don't have to be super specific or anything. Just put them in one bin. You don't have to separate them. The company picks it up and they recycle in a machine called single stream. And that machine, based upon density and weight and all of those things, is able to separate out the plastics, the glass, everything, the paper. It separates all of them out. And so I think that is the best method, because you'll get the most number of people. A lot of people just don't like separating their waste, you know? They're like, oh, it's a hassle to separate my waste. But if you could just say, oh, just put your recycling, anything recyclable, just put it there and do single stream recycling, I think that's the most effective. That's how we'll get the most efficiency out of our waste management.
Okay. So everyone who joined this Zoom, I think the time is already quite late right now, and then I think we already have some fruitful discussion on the waste. And so I think even though we still have several questions that is not directly answered and directly I give to Ms. Jocelyn to answer, but I think we will stop this discussion session, and I think I want to ask you, Jocelyn, to have a concluding remark and also something like a message or moral message on the waste management, especially how or what is the best way for students to protect environment when we talk about the waste that we produce in our daily life. Okay, so please.
So I first started my waste management work as a student. I started 2 recycling programs at 2 different, at the university I went to, and then one at my high school, or I don't know what you guys call it, college, but university and before university, I started recycling programs, and I just influenced the people that I knew. Like that's what I was able to do there. It ended up transforming those communities because they started recycling there, and it was financially beneficial to both communities because recycling does bring in money. So so that was, I think, just do what you can where you're at. And I was involved in environmental clubs, and that's how I did it. And now I'm involved in the environmental agency, protection agency. And so I'm able to influence even more. But before you feel like, oh, why can't I do something bigger? Just do what you can at your level with what is around you. And so, if it's recycling, that's awesome, because that helps save the environment too. So,
yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you so much, Dr. Jocelyn Piero, for gave us a very fruitful discussion on this topic on the conservation, but moreover that a part of conservation is also the waste management. And I'm sorry that several of you still have the question, but I cannot send it to Dr. Jocelyn. We are grateful to have you, Jocelyn. And then thank you so much for all of you who participate in tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it is quite very fruitful, and I mean we still have a lot of other questions, but I'm sorry for the time limitation. And I think we still have another session with Jocelyn because I dare enough to ask her for allocating time for us. So next week, don't forget in the same time, we will have the discussion on the, a little bit more advanced topics on the how the law and the policy relate and react to each other when we talk about the environmental matters, because I think this is very interesting and very significant topic to discuss today, especially during this pandemic. I mean, there is a change of policy, but in Indonesia itself, we have several things that I think we could share next week, Jocelyn, to have a nice discussion next week. Okay,
excellent.
So thank you so much, Jocelyn. So
thank you guys.
Again, we appreciate so much for your kindness and for your time allocation for letting us and sharing us a very interesting topic tonight in Indonesian time. And I hope to see you soon next week, and have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
And I think it is time for me to close this discussion.